Sam.
Hello, you're right.
You sound very sunshiny for the time of night it is.
It's all fake. No, it is late. What time is it? It's 10:34 at time of recording.
It's bedtime is what it is.
It is. As you can see, also, for anyone who's watching this, not listening, this is the first time we're actually recording video content for Wholala. I don't really know what it's going to become. And for anyone who's listening to this on their normal podcast device, this will mean nothing to you. We're experimenting. We're changing it up. We're doing some new things.
We're curious. This is the worst time as well that I could be trying to do video. I had a haircut today and he just scalped me. Look, down the sides here, this is a skin fade.
That is a hairless Sphinx cat on the sides of your temple.
Hairless on huge, and he's left the top really long. And like
it is a contrast.
I mean, when we say a high fade, I'm trying to describe this for someone who can't see it. It is a high fade with just skin underneath it. I mean, the back of my head is, it's...
Can I see the back of your head?
Let me just see the back. Hold on. Yeah.
Go on, Civil.
It's like it's been vetoed.
Oh my God. Talk about the headless monks.
I know. I couldn't believe it. Well, anyway, at nighttime, tell you what, that's when the monsters come out, Sam. Today, we're talking about Steven Moffat, someone we've really not visited very much. We've talked about him very much in passing in our discussion so far, but specifically Steven Moffat's knack for writing monsters and some of our favourite Doctor Who monsters courtesy of Steven Moffat.
Exactly. I do like the episode title. We've been toying with this episode for a long time, but we really wanted to do it because, like Alasdair said, we have touched on him. We've touched on a few of his episodes. We've done The Day of the Doctor, which is a Matt Smith episode sort of later in his tenure. We've looked at The 11th Hour, which is Matt Smith's first episode. And we've also looked at The Pilot, which is the first episode of series 10 with the Doctor and Bill with 12. But we've never really, for a writer that has given so much to the Doctor Who universe, and I think arguably, and we'll talk about it, but arguably has created the best monster of New Who, original monster. We really haven't paid him his dues yet, so I thought it was about time to pay him a visit.
We really haven't, and I'm quite meticulous. When we do what I would designate a topic episode rather than just rewatching, we do our homework in any case, but for these I really insist on doing my homework, and that's part of why I've kind of delayed this one a few times and gone, let's just watch New Earth, is that I scour the internet for kind of what are the critics saying, what are the Doctor Who boffins saying about X thing, and then I try and kind of consolidate everything and I do my research, and that's because I want to get the facts right. When we talk about something kind of like this, I always want to make sure that we're not putting out misinformation. We're getting our dates and times right. And in doing that, I've realised, the contribution Steven Moffat has made to the Doctor Who universe. I mean, I knew it was huge. We know it's huge. We've said this as well, that it's huge, but it is ginormous. And I do think we're probably going to have to take a little bit more of a look in at some Steven Moffat episodes in future, because there is a lot to explore there that really contrasts, I think, with the Russell T Davies stuff we've seen so far.
It's funny, as we talk about a lot on the podcast, we really grew up when we were young children in Russell T Davies' first era, and that holds a lot of like nostalgia in our hearts, and I think that we tend to lean towards that era when we're talking about Doctor Who, because that was what we grew up with and what we're most nostalgic for. But in lockdown in 2020, I did a big rewatch of all of New Who from Rose up until, I think it was Jodie's first series, I think, of that era. And I remember getting to Matt Smith and being a bit like, oh, David Tennant's gone, Moffat, it's all downhill from here in the back of my head. And then I was rewatching them. And for some of the episodes, rewatching for the first time in quite a while. And I suddenly was like, do you know what? This is pretty good. You know that the meme of the guy, I'll tell you what, that's bloody nice. That's bloody lovely. Bloody lovely. And I realised that his era, I like a soft spot for Matt Smith's era, I think, again, because I was quite young when I was watching it. Really bloody good stuff. Really, really good stuff. Well, a tiny bit of context for his era before we dive into Alasdair, as he said, he's done amazing research into all the facts and figures and really insightful things to do with this era and these monsters. We're going to definitely focus more on Steven Moffat's monsters in this episode rather than like his era as a whole and his like general like writing.
Yes, so Steven Moffat is a Scottish TV writer, producer, and screenwriter. He is best known amongst all of his other work for his work on Doctor Who. And he's actually been a fan of Doctor Who since his childhood. I think, like all the best people who work on Doctor Who, they are childhood fans. One of the earliest things he did, actually, which I think is so interesting, we revisited one of my favourite episodes, which is Human Nature, Family of Blood, the two-parter. And that is based on a book by Paul Cornell called Human Nature. And Steven Moffat actually contributed a segment to that book. Fun fact.
I didn't know. We were talking about this just before we started recording, and that was the first time I'd heard about it. I had no idea.
Yeah, and something that you really like that I actually haven't seen for a long time is The Curse of Fatal Death, the comic relief special from 1999. And that's, I think, Steven Moffat's first TV contribution with Rowan Atkinson, Hugh Grant, and Joanna Lumley, amongst others, in a one-off, very camp special for comic relief.
It was very, very camp. I love the Wilderness Years. Just has a beautiful. I think we need to do like maybe in season 3 of Wholala, we need to do a Wilderness Years episode and just kind of touch on all the different things, because there were many a treasure in there. But I didn't realize that he wrote that episode.
Yes, he did. Yeah, it's in it. I mean, there's so much to say about that episode. I won't get stuck on it because there's tons we can say about the weird overlaps, behind the scenes facts, people who worked on that. There's so much to say about that one. In March 2004, right before the show came back for the 2005 revival, Moffat was announced as one of the writers who would be writing episodes under Rusty Davies. He wrote 6 episodes between 2005 and 2008, and he won lots of awards in this era, rightly so. In March 2008, Russell T Davies went on record. He said he often rewrote scripts for other writers, but didn't touch a word of Moffat's episodes.
I mean, I can see that. I felt like, I think as a younger viewer especially, it's difficult to see different people's writing styles and like different people's work. So when you're watching a show like Doctor Who that is such like an overarching plot, you don't necessarily see different directorial choices in an episode or different writing styles. And a lot of them would just blend in for me as like the overarching story of Doctor Who. But even at such a young age, watching like series 1 to 4, you knew when it was a Steven Moffat episode. You knew when it was him writing.
Yeah. They're bloody brilliant. So needless to say, he is an incredibly talented writer, and we got 7 unforgettable years of Doctor Who with Steven Moffat, which we really haven't paid our dues to.
We've got a lot to look at. There's a long future ahead of this podcast.
Listen, we could be here until we might be having our 60th anniversary.
I can see it.
Migraine just started. Moffat was very significantly involved in casting both Matt Smith as his 11th Doctor and Peter Capaldi as the 12th Doctor, and also overseeing the 50th anniversary celebrations in 2013. We talked about those at the start of Series 2, where I slated the Day of the Doctor and didn't really mean to be as negative as I was. But
you were a negative Nancy at the beginning of season 2. You really were holding nothing back.
I came in with fists swinging at the start of season.
You were like, welcome to season 2 of Wholala. So happy to have you back. Let's talk about this shit episode that I hate.
First of all, let's fight. Yeah, I'm sorry for that.
Did you go back on any of that?
It was, I mean, what I should have said is that, and I think we alluded to this, but the behind the scenes of the 50th anniversary was a nightmare.
Yeah.
Like trying to write that without knowing who's in it, who's available. No one's, I think we said Matt Smith was out of contract.
I literally don't even think he had the current Doctor.
He didn't have the current Doctor. It was dreadful. It would have been hell. And I feel very sorry for him. There was a lot of pressure on him at that time, and I'm very sorry, Stephen. I didn't mean to be rude. As you said, Sam, he's credited on a lot of episodes of Who. I believe he's credited for more episodes of Doctor Who than Rusty Davies. Difficult to work out glancing at the credits, because sometimes those credits include parts of kind of the Sarah Jane adventures and other things as well that he also kind of did bits of. But he's credited on 48 episodes of Who plus 4 minisodes. 48 episodes of Doctor Who is insane to me.
That is crazy.
Volume of words. It was a shocker to, I think, move from the RTD era into the Steven Moffat era of Doctor Who. For us as children, change is difficult anyway. This was earth-shattering. This was tectonic. It was the first time we'd been thrust into a new era of Who. Now a very exciting thing for us. At the time, a very frightening thing, Sam.
Yeah, we very a frightening thing indeed. I don't know about you, but I wasn't ready. I just loved David Tennant so much, and I loved Russell, and I wasn't ready for the change. I don't know if you know that Stewie Griffin quote when he's like, "I don't like change." That was very much me at the time.
Yes. So I had a look at how the people characterize the differences. People have said the Rusty Davies era is perhaps more accessible to new viewers because I guess the purpose of the revival was to kind of allow it to be taken seriously as a sci-fi on TV. Had to have a bit of a fresh start to bring in a new audience who didn't know anything about the old show, and for a contemporary modern audience. And Moffat's era, you've called it the fairy tale era. I think that's not your coining that.
I don't think I made it.
Yeah. And
I'm not saying that I did the Ellie Diamond.
Yeah, and I just thought, why not bring it over here?
When I was in America, there's this amazing phrase called the elephant in the room. And I thought I'd be the first person to bring it to the UK.
Steven Moffat introducing every trope into his era. When I was in America, and I thought, why not bring it over here?
Did you know that Steven Moffat invented Doctor Who? He brought it over here.
Did he? He brought it over here?
Yeah.
It is a fact that Steven Moffat had a knack for writing some wonderfully scary monsters and is responsible for giving a lot of us childhood nightmares. What was the first Steven Moffat monster that made you wet yourself?
And why?
And why? 500 words or less.
Do you know what? Everyone would always tell me about how terrified they were of the empty child. But I don't know what it was. I was never particularly scared of the empty child and the gas mask zombies as a kid. I think that it's a really interesting premise. And I think that the nanogenes are something we've spoken about this. We've done like a whole deep dive on this episode. But the fact that there's no real monster here, like in Doctor Who, you have like aliens, you have villains, you have monsters, and the empty child, the gas mask zombies, the nanogenes are really interesting because they're certainly not villains, they're not really aliens, and they're certainly not monsters. They're just creations, I would say. And I do agree that they are scary, but I don't know, were you scared of the empty child when you watched those episodes?
Yes, I was.
Oh, you ran away, I forgot.
I did. So for the second episode, whichever the second part was of the empty child saga, I was so scared I just ran up the stairs screaming. I was convinced the Doctor was about to become one of the gas mask children. I think it was that kind of like, it was the body horror of like their hollow heads, and we'd seen like a gas mask burst out of this guy's mouth. We talked about this before back in season 1, whenever that was, and we said like one of the notes on the kind of behind the scenes sound design for it was they wanted like that sound of like creaking leather plus like a skull
bone cracking, yeah,
bone crunching. That was pretty horrible. And the like infectious nature of it, like it was in the air, that was really frightening. Like you couldn't really see if it had already got you, and it was I think it was touch, but it was a bit of like a zombie-esque thing going on.
Yeah.
And just their whole like dead-eyed wander towards you. You know how they say like you don't need to be scared of like something that's running towards you. It's something that's like walking towards you because it knows it'll get you.
What's something that you love about Zero? What's a monster that terrified you?
Well, okay, aside from that one, a monster that I was scared by was probably the Clockwork Droids. It's interesting because a lot of these probably are like objectively not the scariest. Like if you were to transplant a 9-year-old me here now and show them every episode of Doctor Who, there's probably a million other things that boy will find quite scary. But the Clockwork Droids really got me. It was something about you couldn't see their eyes because they don't have eyes because they're droids, but they wear carnival masks and they have this kind of like black space where the eyes would be. And they're in this kind of constant sinister grin. And it's not actually the mask that scares me as much as it's something about the wigs I find really scary. The like tightly curled, like Edwardian wigs are really scary to me. Like I feel like they like smell dusty. Something about that just gives me some like, ooh, it's like being like, it's like when your parents like take you, middle class upbringing, Clacton. When your parents take you to a National Trust location and you go to some old house or something, do you know what I mean? Have you had this? You've had this.
Yeah.
And you peek into like the rooms of an old house and they've like kept them like perfectly preserved old bedrooms and things. That sat well with me. So maybe that's my own thing going on. Mm-hmm. But they freaked me out. I didn't like them. I didn't like the way they moved. I didn't like the little knives in their hands. Mm-hmm. None of it sits well. Plus, as you said, again, there's no sinister intention behind them. They are running on programming. There's a few times he plays with that kind of thing, that there's no malice in what they do. It's just the way they're programmed, or they have ambiguous intentions. Sometimes it's monsters. Sometimes we don't know what they want. Yeah. And we never find out. It remains ambiguous forever. Mm-hmm. Or there's a much more literal one. I think it's in like Oxygen might be the name of the episode, where the Doctor and Bill are kind of running out of time and they say they have to kind of convince the algorithm that it's more valuable to keep them alive. It's that kind of thing that happens, which is really interesting.
Yeah, I agree. I think that he got to play with that idea a lot in Russell's era. The Vashta Nerada aren't an inherently evil entity. They used to live in forests, and the whole premise is that their forests got cut down and destroyed to make all these library books, and now they live in the library. And they're just trying to eat. They're hungry. They've been moved out of their home. They're just trying to eat. But he takes something so normal, and I think Steven Moffat just does this deliciously, and I do think he does it better than any other writer on Doctor Who. Doctor Who in the classic era would do this, and I don't know if you know, with the Auton episodes in John Pertwee's era, they obviously would take things like shop window dummies and make them terrifying, but they sort of went further than that, and they went into making anything plastic that could come alive and kill you. And there were like plastic resting plants and like children's dolls, and at one point a child's doll comes to life and tries to strangle someone to death, and apparently the BBC got hundreds of complaints about that, because they were like, my child can't sleep because it thinks its doll's going to kill it in its sleep. And I think that Steven Moffat takes something not at all scary and really makes you afraid of it. So with the Clockwork Droids, a clock ticking, just a tick, tick, and you're terrified. And with the Vashta Nerada, it's your shadow. And I don't know about you, but like for weeks after that, if I saw a shadow, I would avoid it.
What's another one that you particularly enjoyed? Not necessarily kind of a terrifying one, but one that you thought was interesting at least.
So Steven Moffat has written for a lot of returning monsters, and I think we'll probably touch on that a bit later in the episode, but he did create a lot of incredible monsters and also had a lot of incredible ones invented in his era. One of the monsters that he created as an original concept that I adore is the Silence, and I think you'll probably agree with me on this. I think that they're one of, maybe not the, but one of the best New Who monsters, like original monsters to come up. And again, it's playing with your senses, it's playing with what you know, and you're so afraid of the Silence because you can't remember that you saw them. And they get to play in this episode really well with horror, where like Amy, she can't remember that she's looking for them because she doesn't remember who they are, and she keeps seeing the lines, the crossings on her arms. For every time she sees one, she makes a mark, and you just get this sequence of her with like flashes of lightning and in the dark, and suddenly she's got them all over her face and all up her arms, and then you look up and they're all over the ceiling. And I think that they're just amazingly, he did a really smart thing setting those episodes where you introduce the Silence in sort of 1960s America, very like Area 51, because they do have that classic quote unquote like alien look when you think of like the big eyes and the like elongated head, like big bald round head. And the whole episode is set around that, like NASA and space exploration and stuff. And to create a monster so scary but so easily recognizable, and then at the end of that episode have it be that the image of that monster was shown to the world during the space flight, so we all saw it. Every time you see the footage of Neil Armstrong on the moon, you're seeing that alien, and then you forget you saw it, but that image is like embedded in your brain, and that is why we have that image of an alien. I think that doing little things like that make you stop and think in your real life, maybe that is what that is. Yeah. I think that that's something that he did. He really, even not necessarily in fear, but just in story writing, he has such a beautiful way of leaving the monster with you. You think about it once the episode's over, and it stays with you.
Very, very true. I read this great quote. They put it so well. This was on the whole like write-up of his entire era. It was on the movie blog. I just want to read this one bit because they put it better than I ever will be able to.
Yeah, go for it.
They said, Moffat returned time and again to monsters that weaponized the act of watching a scary television show. In The Impossible Astronaut and The Day of the Moon, the silence existed in the edits, erasing themselves from history. Their only mark is a distorted continuity between cuts within the scene. Characters often wonder how they got where they were or why they did what they did when the audience just sees a cut, which is really interesting as well. And we'll get on to other monsters that do something really interesting and similar with this as well. But it's funny because in more recent years, horror movies have played into a bit of this like, don't look at it, or it forces you to look at it kind of trope as well. Those impulses in horror cinema that are really difficult to like wrestle with, like try not to think about that thing or try not to look at that thing, or it can't hurt you if you don't look at it thing. Bird Box reverses that idea as well. You know, the monster only hurts you if you look at it. And so that whole thing. But he was kind of ahead of the curve, I think, maybe with that kind of like whole trope. This was in like 2012, I want to say.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I think that in recent years, I can't remember the titles of them all, but obviously we have Bird Box where you can't look. There's a movie where you can't, I think it's called like Breathe or something. It's where I think there's a blind murderer coming to kill these people and they have to hold their breath and you can't breathe because if you breathe, he'll hear you. There's, you know, ones where you can't. What's the movies with Emily Blunt? The Quiet Place, where you can't make any noise because the aliens can then hear you and they'll come and get you. And I think that kind of thing has come across a lot recently. And I'm not saying Steven Moffat invented it, but he certainly was doing it in 2007. I'll tell you that.
Well, and he was churning it out every week.
He was churning it out
for the little kiddies.
The kiddies were enjoying it.
Go on, Alex. Were laughing it up.
Give me another monster that you love of Steven Moffat.
Now, this is controversial. This isn't an original Steven Moffat monster, I'm afraid, but I like Steven Moffat's Daleks. Now, not everyone does, and I don't like all of Steven Moffat's Daleks because I think there were some misfires with. It's the Asylum of the Daleks, which is an episode that I love. That one that we'll have to come to. That is very controversial. I quite like the concept of the Asylum of the Daleks. It's a whole ridiculous premise. The story is silly, but the whole Doctor is silly. Get over it. I like the layers, the psychology, the motivations that get applied to some of these classic monsters to give them a little bit of a twist, which is always fun as well. I think these Daleks feel a little less two-dimensional than some of the previous ones we've had as well, which is super interesting. The quote that I really like, there's this confrontation that's happening in the Asylum of the Daleks. The Doctor, Amy and Rory have been kind of summoned / caught in this trap, which means they stand in front of the Parliament of the Daleks, which is this huge kind of congregation of all kinds of different color Daleks together, and they're all petrified of their own asylum of insane Daleks, and they need someone to go down and blow up the planet because it's become a risk for them. And the Doctor says basically that he didn't believe that such a place existed. He said it never made any sense to me. And the Dalek Prime Minister, ridiculous, said, why not? And he said, because you'd just kill them. And the Dalek said, it's offensive to us to extinguish such divine hatred. And the Doctor's like, offensive? And then he delivers this so well, the Dalek. Does it surprise you to know the Daleks have a concept of beauty?
You sir doing your best Alan Rickman impression, Potter.
Surprise you, Potter, to know the Daleks have a concept of beauty. Mm-hmm. And then he goes, I thought you'd run out of ways to make me sick. Hello again. You think hatred is beautiful. And then he says, perhaps Rickman's back. Perhaps that. No, he doesn't even sound like that. He's more like, perhaps.
He's a lot. He's kind of like, he reminds me of Dalek Khan a bit in the way he speaks.
Who's
like
this?
It's got, I don't know. It's got a lot of like the intonation. Who's that?
She just ran right through here. Who was that?
Continue.
He says, perhaps that is why we've never been able. Perhaps that's why we've never been able to kill you. Well, it's taken all the impact.
Why does he sound like kind of turned on? Perhaps that's why we've never been able to kill you. And the Doctor's like,
taking all the impact out of the dialogue.
No, anyway, do you know what? I know the scene you mean, and it's impactful.
I just like they added They return to the idea of like Dalek blasphemy, Dalek religion, Dalek belief systems of some sort, and the adoration of hatred, and also then how they U-turn reverse that on the Doctor and say, maybe that's why we never called you babe. Maybe we're not missing. Maybe we just think you're such a hateful, angry bitch. We don't want to touch you because we kind of like it, which I just think is an interesting angle. Another great bit within that episode is that Oswin, one of the kind of splinter versions of Clara, has been trapped inside a Dalek, which is, again, horrifying, really scary. The idea that you could be wired up and trapped inside a Dalek yourself is just another classic Steven Moffat horror moment for me. That one I remember really shook me. Like, that was one of the, like, I think last recent Doctor Who episodes that really like rattled me as a concept. Seeing like Jenna Coleman like strapped up inside like a Dalek was super weird. And she can access like the Dalek hive mind, so she can see like what the Daleks are thinking, what they're feeling, all that information. And she's like, why do they hate you so much? And she's kind of sobbing as well with a Dalek's voice, which is again like so interesting.
They hate you so much.
Why? And it's sounds ridiculous when we do it, but it's really good because you get like a sobbing Dalek at one point, which is again so bloody brilliant. And again, it's just like we've grown stronger in fear of you. It's like I think such a good line. It's like almost like the more you fight them, they're so scared of you. That's why they keep coming back harder every time. And I just enjoy those layers. I just think there's something interesting in that I like. I think he doesn't kind of always just want to kind of break ways with the past of the show, but he does try to, I think, almost like add a bit of weight to explain why things have been how they are and where they're going. And I don't know, I like all that.
No, I get that. I think that talking to you about it then has like helped with my like thoughts about the Dalek and see the positives of them in Steven Moffat's era. My instinct is to say that I think Russell did the Daleks the best. I think that on paper, plain and simple, the Daleks are balls of hate. The only emotion that they know is hate. And I do think that Steven, as he did with a lot of characters, not just monsters, but characters in general, wrote them really well at times where I think that, like you said, like, does it surprise you that Daleks have a concept of beauty? And then the Doctor saying that you think hatred is beautiful. And that whole concept of Clara. I think I really love how he paralleled Clara as Oswin being in the Dalek. And then later in The Magician's Apprentice, have Clara have to be forced inside a Dalek. And obviously it was a different version. So for her, there's no like PTSD. But for us as an audience member, we're like, oh my God, Clara's back in the Dalek. I do think that one thing Steven Moffat suffers from, and I think we'll talk about this more in a later episode when I think we'd quite like to like dedicate a certain episode to each showrunner's era, of having really high highs and really low lows. And I think for all the highs that Asylum of the Daleks are, I think The Magician's Apprentice and The Witch's Familiar had some really low moments where the Daleks were such secondary characters. I mean, maybe it's an instance of piling too much. You have Davros, you have Missy, you have the Daleks, and they just become real secondary characters that are just like robots. And I think that the Asylum of the Daleks works really well visually with Steven Moffat's like concept of the episode, where you have all these Daleks from a million different eras of Doctor Who, classic, new, whatever, because this is where their dumping ground is. And then when you come to the Series 9 opener, Asylum, The Witch's Familiar and The Magician's Apprentice, you again have all these Daleks mixed together, classic Daleks, new Daleks, the Supreme Dalek, Davros, and it's like, there's no reason for them all to be like that. It's kind of just felt like a nostalgia porn. And I didn't love that. I didn't love that when the Daleks were written badly within his era, it was quite bad. And that kind of takes away the shine of how good they were in other moments.
I get that. I do totally get that. It has just reminded me of one other excellent moment, though, from The Magician's Apprentice. Just another couple of juicy bits of horror they embed for that as well. When Clara's trapped inside the Dalek casing and she tries to say to the Doctor, I'd never hurt you, I love you. It just goes, I hate you, exterminate. And it's like, you can't articulate, even if a Dalek mutant wanted to say something nice, it can't say it because it converts it to something hateful on the outside. Was interesting. And the other part that was horrible as well is Missy and Clara end up in the Dalek sewers, which is where all the decomposed Daleks end up. So the walls are made of dead Dalek because they can't die. I think they're just like, the flesh just lives forever. And every time they like prod the wall, it like screams and it's like, oh, it's the sewers. Like the sewers are alive with Daleks that won't ever die and they're all suffering. And it was just one of those horrible moments just for the sake of adding something disgusting to the lore, which is funny.
It is. No, it is.
Anyway, let you speak for a moment now, darling. You tell me what you like.
Well, it's a beautiful segue from what you've done. I would love to, if I may, touch on Steven Moffat's returning monsters from either classic or New Who. So I've got a little list here that I'll rattle through of all of the returning, and I wrote this list. So if I miss any, first of all, sorry, and second of all, feel free to correct me. All of the returning villains and monsters that were either from Russell T Davies era or from classic Who. So we had the Daleks come back. We had the monsters that were in the last era that we will come back to and dedicate a proper amount of time to. We had the Silurians, which had never been seen before. We had the Pandorica Alliance, which featured all kinds of different aliens that we'd seen before, like the Hoiks, Weevils from Torchwood, all sorts. The Autons came back, the Ood, the Cybermen, the Ice Warriors, the Zygons, Missy and the Master, Davros, the Time Lords, and a little fun one that I love is the Movellans. And one that I also have just realised I didn't put on this list was the Alpha Centauri as well. Came back from
Alpha Centauri. Was that the giant floating eyeball?
The giant eyeball. It's not a floating eyeball. It's like a big green alien from, I think it's the first Doctor's era, maybe the second Doctor's, I can't remember. And I think it was in Twice Upon a Time, they appeared on screen and it was the original voice actress who played her in the classic era playing her once more. But I think that Steven Moffat had a lot of fun playing with characters that have been in Doctor a few times. The character I think he wrote the best that had come back a few times, both in Classic Who and New Who, was Missy. Other monsters that I loved, I was so excited to see the Silurians. I was so excited to see the Ice Warriors. And I, which I know you weren't, was so excited to see the Zygons come back, because those are three of the monsters that I thought were amazing in Classic Who and really deserved like a New Who redo. So I was really excited to see those back. One that I'd love to have a chat with you about, because I think it is my favourite, some of my favourite Steven Moffat writing, is his interpretation of the Master through Missy.
You know what? That was actually next on my list, and we didn't even plan that. Missy's arc is so interesting. I was looking up Missy before this to try and plan some kind of intelligent thought around Missy, and a lot of questions that people ask online is kind of, was Missy good? Was she actually good? And people kind of saying like, well, Missy never really turned good. The thing is that Missy almost, at the very end of her life, made the very first choice on a path that might have led her to goodness, but then her life gets cut short, and that's the tragedy, is she never gets to explore that version. And even though she was kind of on a kind of pathway to try and in a very twisted way rekindle a friendship with the Doctor, because she thinks they're best friends, and she thinks they're almost like some kind of like insane love story in itself. Like, and their way of showing affection is through kind of fighting each other and trying to convince the Doctor like, we're the same, really, like really, you're like me. And it doesn't quite work. It's very interesting. And and the tragedy of like never knowing like where Missy might have ended up, because ironically the Master kind of kills themselves, is interesting. Other funny thing I have to throw in at this point is, in visiting the TARDIS wiki, God bless the TARDIS wiki editors, Missy canonically, according to prose, ran over Danny Pink with a milk float. The person who killed Danny Pink was Missy in a milk float. I'm so serious.
Is that canonically true?
In my head, it's the canonical story. I just laugh when I got to that point.
When they first revealed it was Missy, because obviously when we first meet her, she's like the guardian of the afterlife, it looks. And she's very like Mary Poppins-esque. And then when it's finally revealed who she is, I thought it was going to be the Rani. So initially I was a little bit disappointed, because I really thought it was going to be the Rani. But I just love how when we first meet her, she's very like put together. Her hair is very put together. Her suits are very put together, and she's very articulated. And as her era goes on, we see the crazy. And like when she, in the finale of series 8, when she's on the plane and she's locked up, and you know she's let them arrest her, she's let UNIT arrest her, and she's in the plane, and she's like, "You're gonna die in a minute." And then, and I'm just letting you know, you're going to die in a minute. And Osgood's like, "Oh, stop talking to me." She's like, "Oh, I'm doing you a favor. I'm just letting you, like, you're going to die either way. I'm just telling you a favor." And then she sits there and she's like, oh, Missy, you're so fine, you blow my mind. Hey, Missy. Like,
Yeah.
you could just start to see the crazy come out.
Yeah.
And then I think the thing that Steven chose to do really well with Missy as the Master is prove what a threat they are, because in Russell T Davies' era, the Master obliterated a tenth of the population of the Earth within like his first episode. He put Martha and her family through hell. Like, you really saw what the Master can do, and I don't think that it should ever be understated just how dangerous the Master is, despite how likable they are. And I think Missy is one of the most likable Masters because she's so funny and she's cheeky and you like her. So you quite quickly see what she's willing to do, and she kills Osgood.
Mm-hmm.
Immediately, and she kills a lot of people, and she, plays with Danny Pink to mess with Clara, to mess with the Doctor, and she brings back the Cybermen, and she takes the corpses of humanity and turns them into Cybermen. And this really sort of, I don't know if this started, I don't know if it was in Classic Who or not, but there becomes a real connection between the Master and the Cybermen, which then flows through into Chris Chibnall's era. But we get that finale of season 10 when Missy then meets John Sims' Master, and the two of them together, it is so good.
It is really good. Though John Sim looks like jarringly like a magician for me in those episodes.
It's meant to be much more of a nod to the third Doctor's Master.
I see. It's a Delago thing.
It's a Delago thing. He's got the black suit with the red underlining. He's got the little beard. He's got the silver hair. It's much more of a Roger Delago thing.
I see.
Maybe it was the eyeshadow that threw you.
It always is. Villains with eyeshadow. I mean, returning to Severus Snape for a moment. They give him purple eyeshadow at some point in the 6th or 7th. It throws me.
Yeah.
I mean, so when we were first kind of preparing for this episode, I thought I was meant to kind of list a low monster, which I, to be honest, struggled with. The best example I could really come up with here was the Skovox Blitzer. Simply in that it was an alien that just bored me. And I think it felt so un-Moffat-y. Maybe that's what it is, in that it is an alien robot built for war, said to be amongst the most dangerous weapons ever created. It's meant to have the power to destroy a planet or something to that effect. And the way they stop it in the end involves the Doctor, who is kind of pretending to be, Peter Capaldi's Doctor, is pretending to be a caretaker in a school. He's tracked down the Skovox Blitzer. It's a school where Clara's working as a teacher. She kind of lures it into the Doctor's shed with the sonic screwdriver, has to dodge out the way at the last second. The Doctor has to kind of play back a sound that makes it think that he is its commander, and then instructs it to shut down. Danny Pink gets in the way, and Danny kind of helps stop them by doing a front flip over the top of it at some point. The whole thing's kind of dumb. There's nothing interesting about this monster. There's a few good kind of pyrotechnic effects and sparks and guns and things happen, but it's just not an interesting villain to me. And it felt so un-Moffat-y. There was no psychological horror aspect to it as far as I could see. There was nothing unsettling about it. It was just a stupid robot that wanted to kill people.
It's interesting. In preparation for this episode, I made a list of every single monster from Steven Moffat's era, and I separated out which ones he wrote the episode for and which ones he was just the showrunner for. And the Skovox Blitzer was one of the ones that he wrote for. It was a Steven Moffat episode, and I completely agree with you. Not gonna lie, I think I may have only seen the episode the whole way through once. When I did that big lockdown rewatch, I definitely petered out a bit towards the end, and I've definitely watched it once, potentially watched it twice. I cannot tell you any major plot points except for the fact that I remember the Doctor became the caretaker of the school. But yeah, it's completely forgettable. I don't think it creates much of a threat, and yeah, I agree with you. I think that it's just another robot from Doctor Who, and I think Doctor Who has enough robots that have been done better. Boo. To take that idea of forgettable monsters and to, I love how you were I could only really think of one I didn't like. I've got a couple, but they all fall within the same category. I showed Alasdair before recording this some photos of 4 months, and I put them together. They're the Hyde creature, the Sandmen, the Time Zombies, and the Brains. And he looked at them and he was like, I don't even remember what the Hyde creature was.
I didn't.
And
I didn't.
If you look these monsters up, specifically the first three, the Hyde creature, the Sandman, and the Time Zombies, they all look the same. They're roughly humanoid practical costumes with like rocky, like natural, like textured skin. And they're so forgettable and they all merge together. And I think specifically in the design, which I'm not sure how much influence Steven Moffat has, I'm assuming quite a lot considering it was within his era. But I think the only one that really sticks out to me in any interest is the time zombies, because you learn that they are future versions of characters you're following in that story, and it shows them like burning. But I think especially towards the end of Steven Moffat's era, so like the tail end of Matt Smith's and then going into Peter Capaldi, again, he had super high highs, some really, really great episodes and really great monsters, but a lot of his villains became incredibly forgettable. And I think it's the return of Dr. Mysterio, which is the episode that has these big sentient alien brains in a jar. I know for a fact I've only seen this episode once, and I would be very interested because on Wholala we tend to go back to episodes we know that we love. And I would love to go back to an episode that A, I don't remember much about, and B, I remember not liking, to see it with a fresh pair of eyes, because I just remember it being a terrible episode. And please correct me if I'm wrong in the comments. Tell me what you think. I have no memory of these brains. I don't know if you do. I genuinely, when I was looking up Steven Moffat's monsters and I saw this, you could have shown me this photo, and I'm a huge Doctor Who fan. I go run a podcast about it. I would not have been able to tell you that this was a Doctor Who villain. I have no memory of it.
Staring at this picture now, I thought that brain was a different monster. I thought this was the face hugger, and I've just realized it is not. And now something's coming back to me. Something's coming back to me now about like brains in jars,
no memory,
lab, something.
I liked the face huggers. I mean, they were stolen from Alien, but I still liked them. These brains, no recollection, no memory at all.
There's an element to me that says, let's be fair, and let's say did we rewatch these episodes, Sam? Did we?
No, but this is my point.
No.
I think there's something valuable to be said in an opinion of having seen something once. I think that it is worthwhile going back and rewatching. And like I said, I'd love to go back and do a full episode on the return of Dr. Wouldn't it be so funny if our Wholala season 2 finale was a rewatch of the return of Dr. Mysterio?
It would be so funny that it's not happening. I think that is a fair criticism to say that. I think we can say a lot in this era like this was there were bumps, and one thing you can't fault is a lot of it was ambitious. And I don't know if maybe that reflects, sometimes when there's less memorable designs, maybe that reflects kind of like a quick turnaround required. Maybe there's production issues involved. I guess sometimes as well there's an idea that is so fantastic kind of in your head or maybe like even really great on paper, and then just when it comes to actually kind of try to construct something or even film something that fits the bill, it doesn't quite work. And I think for the number of monsters we have on this list, I think 4 out of about 40 is a pretty good ratio in terms of forgettable monsters.
For sure. I think, like I said, Steven Moffat's highs when it comes to writing monsters and creating monsters are so high that they are some of the best of the best. However, I do think we have now put off long enough talking about the monster we've been alluding to this whole episode, which to my opinion, and I don't know about you, is the best New Who original monster.
Yeah. I think if you had to think of a non-returning monster that stands out above anything else, or even just one that looking at any of the Doctors people say is the scariest, I think this one takes top spot.
I know. I think that when you think of Doctor Who monsters, if you ask someone to name 3 now, they probably would say the Daleks, the Cybermen, and the Scoville Splitter. No, I'm kidding. They would say the Weeping Angels. The Weeping Angels.
They would. I was going to say, would we say, like, what's that little thing called in the Crimson Horror? Mr. Sweet. That's what they'd say. They'd say the Daleks, the Cybermen, and Mr. Sweet. Let's talk about the Weeping Angels.
I think it's time.
Do you remember watching Blink?
Do you know what? I don't, because 2007 was still in the era where my parents would pre-watch Doctor Who sometimes to make sure it was scary enough or not too scary, or for me.
Scary enough.
Scary enough. And I was
quality control.
And I was gate-kept for the longest time from watching it, so I wasn't allowed to watch it when it was originally on TV. And I bought the box set I think it was volume 3 of series 3 that had Blink on it. And my parents were like, no, that episode's too scary. You're not allowed to watch that episode. You can watch the scarecrows, while the kids are gunning down the scarecrows, and you can watch the Satan Pit if you want. But they said I wasn't allowed.
Fine.
That's fine. But they said you're not allowed to watch Blink. And it wasn't until I was an early teenager, maybe like 12, 13, that they were like,
bless you.
Okay, you can watch this episode. And I watched it, and part of me was like, oh shit, I know what they were talking about. But I think I was just so determined that I was like, I get to watch this, I'm grown up now, that I was like, I enjoyed it more because of that. And I just remember, again, like I said earlier, it's a monster that sticks with you. It doesn't leave you when you stop watching it.
Yes, I'm thinking back to this episode. So many things rush back in my mind, probably just as well because I've seen it so many times since. Like if I am putting on an episode just to have something on, and there's maybe a non-Who fan who's watching, or someone who kind of only superficially knows the show. If you put on Blink, they'll enjoy it. Everyone enjoys Blink.
It's a great one to watch for a non-Who fan.
I don't know if we ever said this. It's one of those episodes of Doctor Who you can watch without watching any other Doctor Who. You can just watch this one as a self-contained story, and it works really, really well, which is another interesting thing, I think, is that you need no other context to enjoy this, because the Doctor and Martha can just exist in this world as secondary characters, which is interesting, with Sally Sparrow and her boyfriend, associate.
Larry Nightingale.
Larry Nightingale. Her best friend's brother as the protagonist in this. It's interesting as well because what Steven Moffat really did after this point was continue to evolve the Angels. So, I mean, I think with the Angels, what's interesting as well is because, as you say, you would think about them a lot because you can't outrun them, you can't outsmart them. You've just got to kind of back away and not lose focus. And I don't even know what you do. Like, ultimately, they're going to get you. There's no way you can escape them. You just got to hope the Doctor's going to save you. In my head, I think when I was younger, I used to think my genius solution would be a sledgehammer. I was like, well, if I just smash it when it's stone, as soon as it reanimates, it's screwed. It's done. It's just bits.
I can see that. I think maybe they like dispelled that later when in the next time we've seen them in Matt Smith's era, they have been dying and not fed for so long that they have, you know how stone erodes and they're just stumps and they're pieces of rock basically. And then as they start to feed off the energy of the spaceship above them, they feed off the energy of the people near them, they start to reform into humanoid shapes, and then they become the Angels again. I almost wish that when the Angels returned in the episodes in Byzantium, that it wasn't advertised as Weeping Angel episodes, because it was the second time that they'd ever come back, and it was a few years, I think it was like 2 or 3 years after they'd originally been on. And it's not until it's a two-parter, and it's not until the very end of the first part that you realise that they're Weeping Angels. And they're going into the Byzantium wreck to find one Weeping Angel. They think there's only one. So there is still a fun reveal where you think there's only going to be one Weeping Angel. And then it turns out that they're surrounded by them. And because in Blink, I think there's maybe 5 or something, because they surround the TARDIS at the end. Four, maybe even 4. Yeah. And in the wreck of the Byzantium, there's hundreds. And you suddenly, as a viewer, you're like, oh God, like you said, you can't escape them. Yeah, because you're going to have to blink at some point. And like you said earlier about how Steven Moffat builds up on the characters, you then gain the lore of the image of an angel becomes itself an angel, and the angel can store itself in your eye, in your memory, and you can feel that you're becoming an angel. And then that's even more expanded later in Chris Chibnall's era, and I think done really well there. And I think that's the sign of a good monster, is that it doesn't have to be written by the creator of it, because it is such a good entity in of itself. And I think that's why it's being so well translated to audio. The Weeping Angels are on Big Finish audio dramas where you can't see anything, and it's all in your head, and it's all through the sound design and the other actors, and they're still just as scary. Yeah, that is brilliant actually, isn't it? I think what's fun as well about this, that people have said, is that some monsters like the Angels in the Moffat era exist outside of the regular mechanics of science fiction storytelling. So like you said, we see a Weeping Angel on a television monitor mirroring how we see such creatures, and we learn that anything that has the image of an angel can itself become an angel. So not only does the angel in the TV screen become real, which is itself a nightmare, but the image reflected in Amy's eye
becomes an angel, and then there is an angel living inside Amy's head, and even the thought of the angel represents an image. And as you said, in the Chibnall era, they take it further. They do a brilliant episode. One of the Flux episodes with the angels is great because someone draws an angel, and that itself starts to come to life. And the 13th Doctor scrunches it up and throws it into the fire. And there's like an angry screech comes from the fire when the image is destroyed. So like all of that's really, really scary as well and good. And we get, I think, those elements. I think that's new to the Series 5 episode, the Byzantium one, that the angels as well can take the voice of someone they've killed, which is really good. And we get that like really creepy moment where they like possess and say, "Oh, Bob here, sir. He died screaming, sir. He was scared, sir. We snapped his neck." And it's like,
I know, it's so creepy. I think seeing things like that they can do and building, the reason that they're so good is because the core thing of what they are, stone statues that can't move when they're being observed, is terrifying. And then they build up the lore. And I think it's really interesting comparing how Chris Chibnall's era does the angels and Steven Moffat's era, where if you look, I can't remember where I saw this. I think it was like a video essay on YouTube. I didn't come up with this observation, but I will say it, imagining that I did, that Chris Chibnall arguably does this aspect of the angels, quote unquote, better. I don't want to use the word better because I don't think it's better, but in a more literal way, I guess, than Steven Moffat did, where Amy never had a physical angel in her. It was all in her head, where she rubs her eye and the stone dust comes out of her eye and her hand turns to stone and the Doctor bites her. And he's like, "This is all in your head. You're not actually becoming an angel. It will kill you, so there is a real threat, but you're not becoming an angel." Whereas this amazing actress called Annabelle Scully plays Claire Brown in the Flux in the Village of Angels and a few other Flux episodes, where she is physically becoming an angel. She rubs the dust out of her eye, same as Amy, but the dust settles and she has to brush it out of the way. And then she starts seeing in her head the wings of an angel. I think that is such a scary image that was teased in Blink in the Weeping Angel's first episode, that, you know, all these other statues could be an angel. And you see the Statue of Liberty be an angel at one point. And then you get that. I don't know how you felt when you saw it for the first time. I didn't love Flux overall. I thought that overall Flux had quite a lot of issues, but I do think the Village of Angels is one of the best episodes of New Who. And the finale of the Doctor being separated from the companion, surrounded by angels, thinking that they want her. They're like, she's like, "Right, you've got me, take me, don't take her," like because she thinks that they're going to take Annabelle Scully's character, and they're like, "No, we don't want her. This was a trap for you. Yeah. We're going to take you." And then she looks down and it's one thing for the angels to transport you to another time, but then she starts to turn into an angel and the wings come out of her and you see the Doctor. This guy is a bit like you were saying about the empty child being so scared they're going to turn to this thing you feared for so long, and you see the Doctor uncontrollably cover her eyes and become a stone statue as a cliffhanger for an episode. What a cliffhanger.
Yeah, pretty brilliant, actually. Pretty brilliant. There's loads of other really fun things to do with the angels. Sadly, we can't even get into all of them. There's the episode, which is the final one for Amy and Rory, where they have a whole kind of hotel set up where they're just like farming people and creating...
It's like a battery farm, yeah.
A battery farm for kind of sending people into the past and then making them live their whole life inside their hotel. And they find Rory is an old man inside one of the rooms and they have to kill themselves to prevent the paradox from happening, which is an insanely dark thing. And I think the Statue of Liberty is an angel in that episode, which is really funny.
Do you know what's scary with that is that I think what they're alluding to is the Statue of Liberty always has been and always will be a weeping angel, but it's never not being observed. Someone is always looking at the Statue of Liberty, and so at any moment it could become an angel, but it hasn't yet. Someone's still looking at it, and again leaves it with you in your brain.
That's so dumb.
So good.
Dumb.
I thought it was good. It's dumb.
They made it in bits. We know they made it in, or do we? Or do we?
Or do we?
Or isn't like the foot in France? I mean, I don't know. Anyway,
you may have found a plot hole there. I could go on about the Weeping Angels forever. We literally could make a whole episode just about the Weeping Angels, and it's just occurred to me now we have never once looked at a Weeping Angel episode. So I will pass this question to the audience. If we were going to look at any one of Steven Moffat's monsters in a particular episode and focus on a story from his era, what would you like us to look at? Would you like us to look at the Weeping Angels? If so, which story? Like Alison said, there are so many stories that cover the Weeping Angels, and we didn't even cover all the monsters. I think all of those monsters and the fears and the hotel tell in series 6 is amazing. I think that the Silurians, we barely touched on those, the Zygons, the Ice Warriors. There's so many things that Steven Moffat brought into this era back from others or having created himself. What would you like us to look at next?
Yes, please let us know. And I hope you enjoyed a little whistle-stop tour of the Moffat era, a very surface-level investigation of his time doing Doctor Who and some of his fantastic creations that we were blessed with on screen for 7 years. Let us know what freaked you out as a child. What made you wet yourself?
I feel like we need to be like, you can reach to us at bluepeter.co.uk.
You can reach us at PO Box 3879.
Well, I'll tell you where you can reach out to us. You can reach out to us on Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, and Threads, all of which are at Wholala Pod. And as always, you can rewatch old episodes of the podcast on our YouTube channel, also at Wholala Pod. And potentially, I don't know, we'll see how this goes. This episode you're listening to right now could be the first video podcast you see on there.
Could be, if I can work it out. If not, enjoy the descriptions of my haircut this week, dear listener. If you have a moment, we would love if you could leave us a review wherever you listen to your podcast. Spotify, Apple Music, something else. If you leave us a review, we would really, really appreciate that. It helps us find new listeners and makes us feel really good about what we do. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Well, as always, we will look forward to seeing you next week, which will actually be, thinking about it now, the finale of season 2 of Wholala.
Holy moly.
It's weird to be doing a podcast on seasons. I don't think many other people do it, but
no
we
one
do
else
it.
does this.
And I stand by it because we decided we would one day and we stood by that decision.
And here we are.
I have one final question for the audience. As next week is the finale for season 2 of Wholala, I would love to know, what episode would you like us to do? Would you like us to look at another topic similar to this one? Would you like us to look at a particular episode? Would you like us to talk about a particular companion or a particular doctor? We look forward to hearing what you'd like to see.
Until next time, we hope you have a fabulous week. May it be free of angels, various other such monsters, clockwork droids, and another such traumatic things.
And don't blink, don't stay in the shadows, and watch out for gas masks. We'll see you next week.
Alan Rickman Dalek wishes you were wonderful. Does it surprise you to know that Alan Rickman Dalek wishes you a wonderful week?
Goodbye.
Goodbye.